At that time when the United States was taking shape, what would you say are the dominant forms of Christianity that, if there were kind of like major strands? Obviously, even as you talk about these different thinkers in your book, they're going to have very idiosyncratic individual views. But what were the major strands at the time?
Well, I guess if you go back to early colonial America and say the Puritan, you're from New England, and so
yes,
John Winthrop's version of Christianity and say traditional Anglicanism, sort of high church Anglicanism. And it didn't take long from say 1630 through to the end of the 17th century going forward that as America became increasingly populous, there was a wide variety of different religious denominations. But at least to a certain extent, in the earliest days of colonial America, it was generally thought across the 13 colonies that Christianity was an important, not just system of religious belief, but played a very vital role in the encouragement of certain kinds of virtues that were necessary for government. And so one way to think about Christianity, at least in the earliest days, is there's this tradition of thinking of the relationship between church and state that in some ways is what was at times referred to as the nursing father state, that the state had to in some way attempt within certain prudential limits to put the principles of Christianity into its law, that there's no separation of church and state as we understand it, that it was the case that most Christians thought that the church and state had somewhat separate realms, but though there was an interplay between those realms, and that one's politics had to be informed by Christianity. Now, how people defined it was obviously different from one denomination to the next, but on the whole, it was generally thought that Christianity should be privileged by the state. And so if you look at a lot of the early, even after we win our independence, the early state constitutions, there's various forms of established churches. In the case of Virginia, the Anglican Church, all the states in some way, if they didn't have a kind of hard establishment, had some language in their constitutions that stipulated that those who would serve in the legislative branch should be of a certain Protestant persuasion more often than not, right? Believe in certain doctrines or profess the truth of the Bible, so on and so forth. And so, trying to pinpoint like what is the dominant strain as in terms of denominations is difficult, but there is a largely shared view that Christianity has an important political role to play in the country and that it should be privileged.
And did you call that the nursing father state?
Yeah, in some instances, this is how it's often characterized, that the state is in some way a vehicle for the inculcation of certain Christian virtues. And so you would have blasphemy laws in lots of places, other kinds of laws. In Massachusetts, I went to Boston College. I remember when I first got there, you couldn't buy beer on Sundays, and there was these sorts of laws. Driving from Ohio to Florida, where I currently work, I remember stopping in Georgia on a Sunday on the move down. You weren't allowed to buy a beer, and so you have Sunday closings for shopping and things like that, sometimes referred to as blue laws. And so, the country had across it a certain shared understanding that Christianity was an important facet, not just in terms of the larger culture, but in terms of how the law ought to give direction to people's lives.